Okay, welcome everyone to the University of New Mexico Law and Mental Health Didactic Series hosted by the University of New Mexico Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences and the New Mexico Behavioral Health Services Division. I'm Anthony Perillo, the Forensic Psychology Training Director in the Division of Forensic Behavioral Sciences in the University of New Mexico's Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences. For our talk today, if you have any questions for our presenter, make sure you enter them in the Q&A box whenever you feel comfortable. We do tend to hold those to the end. We try to get to as many as we can, but just forgive us if we don't get to yours. If you are pursuing continuing medical education credits, there will be a sign-in sheet in the chat box shortly. And for those pursuing APA continuing education credits, that link will be posted again in the chat box, but later on in the latter points of the presentation. Make sure that you open that link before you exit, and make sure when you complete the survey, you save your certificate because we don't have access to those copies of the surveys after the fact. A recording link and PowerPoint slides for this talk will be available to you sometime later this week. And as a heads up for next week's talk in the series, we have Dr. Tiffany Monfort-Dent who will be discussing culturally informed work with court-involved youth. But let's get back to this week. I'm excited to introduce you to today's speaker who will be overviewing custody/parenting time evaluations. This is Dr. Janet DiGiorio-Miller. Dr. Janet DiGiorio-Miller is a licensed psychologist in private practice in New Jersey and also licensed in New York. In addition to sexual offense evaluations and treatment, Dr. DiGiorio-Miller has over 30 years of clinical experience with adolescents and families. She's a frequent presenter, both locally and nationally, over several topics, including family therapy and reunification, relationship issues, and mindfulness. Dr. DiGiorio-Miller has publications in the field of sexual offending, including research on emotional variables and deviant sexual fantasies and sexually abusive adolescents. She's also published regarding mindfulness and sexual offending, and has published a self-help book for young adults called A Great Relationship and Then Some. Dr. DiGiorio-Miller was past president and secretary of the New Jersey chapter of ATSA, the Association for the Treatment of Sexual Abuse, and has served on the board for many years. She's a representative at large on the ATSA board of directors and chair of the ATSA Ethics Committee. Dr. DiGiorio-Miller, Janet, on behalf of the University of New Mexico, we're very excited to having you joining us series and thankful for you sharing your direct expertise here with us today. I will go ahead and throw it over to you.
Thank you. I hope you can hear me okay. There's some traffic going by. I guess that's New Jersey, right?
Yeah, you're fine. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. All right. So what he just gave you in my bio is about my expertise with working with sexual offenders. But I want to tell you a little bit of my journey and how I got to working in a parenting time capacity. So after I left, I ran a child abuse agency for a while, and I left that agency. I began a private practice, and then I started to work with a Ph.D. who did custody evaluations. Said, "Would you like to try some?" And I said, "Oh, absolutely." My doctorate's in marriage and family counseling. So I was really happy to take a systemic view of this. So I think when I offer this very brief introduction to child custody evaluations, I think it's important to recognize that this is just the table of contents of this. Let's put it that way. There's a lot more to doing a custody evaluation, but these are the components that I believe make a very good document and one that you can testify to. So the areas are covered, the standards are covered. And so that's what I want to let you know. So I worked for him, but I didn't just work for him. I observed him do evaluations. I observed him do testimony. I had several of my own cases in this practice that I did several different things, and I want to touch on those. And I read a lot of books, and I went to a lot of workshops. And so that's the minimum I would say that you would need to step into this arena. A lot of people that allergies. A lot of people are kind of nervous about doing in my field, and maybe even in other fields, nervous about doing these kind of evaluations because they're litigious, obviously. They come from court. And there's a option that then perhaps there may be a complaint against you. So people don't really like that much. So I think they're fascinating. And what I've seen in these evaluations really do show you who should, if that's the dispute, if it's beyond 50-50 and New Jersey is 50-50, who should really have the majority of parenting time. This process will help you determine that. And there could be gaps in other people's evaluations, but I think these are the important components and standard components that are expected in this kind of evaluation. So I'm going to go slide by slide here. So every part of the evaluation is for the child's best interest. And that's not just a catchphrase, it's a legal term. So in the child's best interest, I think that's better. You can hear me better. So every law requires this. Usually sometimes it's one child, other times it's more than one child. So every child's best interest is considered at this point. And they need to be addressed in the evaluation. So you use that terminology at the end of the evaluation. You don't use it throughout. You don't comment throughout. This is you come to this decision at the end of all of this process. This whole process brings you to the child's best interest. So the key components, and they go in order. You have to have the documents before you start interviewing. Now, when I say that, that's the ideal, and that's it's hard and fast. But I'll tell you, the way you can begin an interview is maybe to ask the party to begin telling you their side of the story. But that's dangerous. I wouldn't do it. You need the documents. You need to review the documents. You need to come up with questions from the documents. And regarding the documents, I want to make sure I said this. Regarding the documents, if one attorney, say you entered it into a retainer with two parties and two attorneys, if one attorney provides you with documentation, you need to ask the other attorney for a documentation, because you want to see if anything's missing. You also ask the parties. I ask the parties for documentation if they have it, as much documentation as you can get. I do evaluations, different evaluations for court. If you don't have the documentation, maybe everybody knows this, but if you don't have the evaluations, the documents before the evaluation, then you have nothing to interview of. You can't you can't interview. You have to interview off of their questions, but you need the documentation. Very important. So obviously you need signed releases before you get documentation. So that's not the first exact step, but this is the first step to getting those documents. Interviews I'm going to go into in more detail later, but you interview the primary custodial people. So that might be the mother, the father, the mother's new husband, the father, whatever, who's ever in a custodial capacity, meaning living with the child, basically, having some care. Now, you are going to have a collateral interview with all other caretakers, but your interviews involve testing. That's the next thing. So it's a structured interview that you're doing. You're doing a psychological, basically, on every adult and child who's in their teens, because you can test them. So I'll get into that in a minute. Collaterals are a lot of people, and you have to decide sometimes by reading the documents, you decide what collaterals you need. And then they're going to tell you who they think you should speak to, and you should, because you get a lot of information by speaking to people. Now, obviously, these parties are not agreeing on a lot of things. So one of the things sometimes they don't agree on is who this person might pick as a collateral. But I think that you need to get both people's signature on that. You have to, but also get their agreement. And I think there's a good way. And I'll tell you the good way is the other person usually has people. So it's like, I need this person's information. It's the way you approach this evaluation. You have your own styles, but for me, it's that this is a really key important piece. And when you say that, and it's true, because every piece this is a big puzzle. I think the parties appreciate that you're trying to get as much information. I think that's been at least the rapport I have with these clients. So testing, I'm going to go into that too, just naming them here. Collaterals, observations, really important. I'll talk about that. Report writing, how to best write this long report, and then testifying from your report. So it's important to understand the referral question from the attorney. Now that can change, and if it changes, then you need to figure out what question captures the best interest of the child. And I know that's vague, but I'll give you an example. I started doing an evaluation on, trying to think of which one. I'm doing an evaluation on a child who was, probably, I think it was 17. And the attorneys were talking and they were agreeing, which is good. And they kind of patched me in, and we talked about, I also want you to add to this evaluation what specific therapeutic recommendations you will have for a child. Now, you would kind of do that in a lot of ways, but they wanted, particularly around this child, because this child had been in so many therapeutic different things, that they wanted really to know what an expert would think. So they kind of modified the referral question to make it also, make sure you're very comprehensive in those kind of things, which you would do. But you also have to add that they really were concerned about the best interest of the child. Another way that it could change is, I want you to do a psychological, sometimes this is what I have conversations with clients and attorneys about. I want you to do an evaluation, and I want you to do it on a psychological on this person to see if they're safe to be around their kids. So I say, okay, is that all you want? Yeah. Or but then I know this mother's saying this and all this stuff. So I say, okay, well, here's what a custody evaluation is. And that may answer your question better. Because sometimes they go beyond are they safe? And the kid's saying, and so now I'm interviewing everyone around a standard evaluation, and instead of just the key components. So the custody evaluation, there's no stone unturned. You talk to everybody you can, a teacher, a nanny, the grandmother, that you're talking to everybody. You don't do that in, a standard risk assessment. So sometimes that can change. And clarify it. This is what I think you're asking me to do, because the clearer you are with each other, the better your report's going to be. Explain all of the components to the client. Explain what you're talking about when you say, I'm going to interview you. So I'm going to interview you. It usually takes about 2 hours. You can say something like that, or more. And then there's a testing phase where you'll be answering some psychological testing. And then I'll be observing you with the child. So And then I'm writing up a report that's going to go to court. So now they understand what's going on with the retainer. So that's the next thing. You have to have the client sign the retainer and send the retainer funds before you begin any tasks, including listening to what they're saying on the phone. So when they call you up or you start to make an appointment, say you're doing all this to attorneys, sign releases, checks, good, or whatever, Zelle funds, then sometimes when you call to make an appointment, the client will want to start to tell their story. So what I say is, I really need to understand this. I want you to come in and talk to me. I need to take notes while you're talking to me. I can't do that at this time. Can we just schedule the appointment? So I don't listen to what they have to say. I mean, attorneys can tell you their point of view, but you're going to come to yours anyway. But clients are already starting to kind of, in some way, lobby for their side and their story. So it's important also to let people know 2 hours for this interview, 2 hours for the child, which maybe they're taking them. It could be more than 2 hours. Testing's an hour or so, probably less. So you go through all of that. Oh, this is important too. You can't promise an end date. I mean, that's a mistake, because if you do that, you're kind of held to it. This is a court process. I say it's difficult for me to say, because of course they want to schedule the next court date. I say it's difficult for me to say because, and then I go through all the components to the evaluation. I have to do this, that, this, that. Not, and this is the part, the collateral. Sometimes you can't reach collaterals, and it takes a while. So, and some collaterals are very important. One person called me back. I was so happy. I finally connected. It was the past residential place where the kid had been. And that was a very important phone call. And I couldn't really do anything without that piece. That was very important, especially because they wanted more specifics regarding the treatment. All right, now, this is big. The retainer should include fees for all time spent reading, organizing your notes, talking to people like attorneys, scheduling appointments. So those things are really important for you to document for yourself, because time goes by when you're reading or looking or whatever. Then I think, wow, there's a lot of emails I answer back and forth here, and including the time spent scheduling, and then put it in an Excel sheet with all of the different tasks. Court and testimony fees should be more. Also, deposition, there should be more than the fee you're charging, whatever, 50, 100, you decide. Okay, so court documents I talked about, get both attorneys, get all the court documents, review everything. So I'm just going to tell you how to organize it too, because it's a huge task, and the reports are about 42 pages. So I thought I'd give you some tips. So when you get the court documents, get your tabs out, write your questions, then in the notes, but then write them in a notebook. I'm telling you how to say, and make sure you're covering every question possible from the court documentations. Okay, so then from there, you have a set of questions for each person. You also know, based on these documents, a little bit about what they're saying about each other. So you can start that list too. There's questions about a lot of different things. Along the way, attorneys may call you and ask you what you're thinking or whatever, say different things. The only thing you can really talk about to anyone is when you think you might be done with the evaluation. Okay, so also releases, they take a while too. That's an important thing. In my first meeting, as soon as I see the person, I have them sign releases. And I start trying to get collaterals just to hurry up the process, because They've been in court a lot, like sometimes years, people. So this is a lot of the nuances I learned under at the psychologist I learned. When you make appointments with the people who are basically signed the retainer, they should start. They should be very close to one another, because you don't want to look in any way throughout this process like you already have an opinion, and frankly, you don't, because you need the whole process to have one. Or that you're favoring one or the other. They might feel like you're biased or you're hearing the other person first. But I always start with the one who's like with the most allegations, to be honest, the one who's kind of pushing this. So a 2-hour block is good for each interview appointment. That's probably all you can absorb for documentation, because you're taking copious notes and writing more questions as they talk, and for them. So I've had many evaluations where the first 5 appointments were them telling me what's going on with them. So that's 10 hours. That's exactly how it should start, because you need to understand all of their, but they, you can't really do anything else, first of all. Once they should start there. That's only fair. And they can't do anything else unless that, you do that. And you give them as many hours as possible, but then, make sure that they know where they are in the retainer. So, if you're asking for a retainer for 15, 20 hours, I'll get into retainer, but if you're asking for a retainer, it kind of eats it up. Okay, so again, very clearly, how many times did I say this so far? Go over the components to the evaluation: interviews, testing, observations, and report. So that's the basics, Nobody gets any feedback. No one, no. But this is a kind of a good way to approach things, empathetic and curious. I do a lot of mindfulness training too. And frankly, the things that people say, you are curious, because some of it doesn't exactly add up. And there are false allegations. So be very curious to get everything. I love Columbo, for you people who remember him. Okay. Clarify next steps. And I put in, if they ask, I'll tell you what I need. You don't want to say, if they say, well, I'm done with my interview, I'm done with my testing, or something like that, what are the next steps? And I'll say, well, I'll let you know when I could see you again, or when I can schedule with the observation. But now they know, perhaps, that the other person is dragging their feet, but I'm not going to tell them that. And I shouldn't, I'm not going to say, well, I haven't met with so-and-so yet. Now, all of a sudden, that's, again, watch yourself here. You need to be like extremely in the middle. Okay. I already talked about this. If they're talking after 2 hours and you don't know what the primary issue is, or they're just complaining or really just trashing, make sure you listen to them until you understand the issue they have with the other person, because that has to be addressed. That's the reason they're going to court with one another. I use different colored folders for every person. Now, a parenting time schedule is typically in New Jersey, I would imagine in other states, it's 50-50, pretty much. Just everything is, that's how it is. So if you want to modify the 50-50, you need to ask each parent or person who will parent the child the parenting time schedule. So it's very important that they come up with that, because you get a really good opportunity to see how willing they are to negotiate too. it's not that typical, this is how it is. But I also think it's your responsibility to come up with a parenting time schedule as well. That is something that will be included. And you're going to have an idea of what you think that should be too. But the question is parenting time, but also where the child should reside often. So you need to weigh in on that. Okay, so testing. Testing supports the evaluation. It's what makes it a psychological evaluation. So you're really doing a few psychologicals within a psychological. So testing is extremely important. So, and it should be the standard test, not like obscure, as I say down there. I think, typically everybody, uses the MMPI, but I believe that's very oriented in a negative way, in a more pathological way when I score people on it. So I use the Milan. Those are very well-known tests. And I like the Milan Adolescent a lot. Sometimes it's really, really accurate. It's amazing to me. I think it's amazing. And also you'll see that a lot of times you'll find faking good, but that's not uncommon in forensic settings to fake good. But what else is with faking good is an interesting thing to interpret. Okay, so every adult who parents a child should be evaluated and tested, and every teen over 13. And I use the Milan. I think the PAI is becoming a little, but I think the Milan has been, accurately standardized for court. So there are a bunch of measures that I used at the Child Abuse Agency that my staff used. They're called domestic violence inventory. They're not really, standardized. They haven't really been through the rigor to become a test. They're a measure, and you could get in trouble using something like that. I heard another one is called the Child Abuse Potential Inventory, and we use those regularly, and we use those in court to testify regarding child protective cases. And that was part of the referral question. But the testing is not as does not stand up as well when you're testifying. And everything needs to really support your point of view anyway. So the testing really needs to be something that you can interpret in a way, which you all know supports what you're also what you're seeing. Okay. So, and obviously don't use the computer generated testing. It needs to be sometimes they say it really well and you just have to kind of take a few of their adjectives. But it should be in a way that you really are thinking about the client yourself. So this could be, even when one evaluation, her mother lived in, I forget, France or something, and she wanted her mother talk to the child and she wanted me to talk to that person. So I wouldn't say no to a collateral, even if they want to talk up the person, because they may give you more information with regard to the dynamics. Like, for example, if the collateral, only wants to trash the opposite side, you get an understanding that that's not a very helpful collateral to the child. That they're supposed to be guiding the child, and that's not very helpful. So if they're supporting that kind of frame of mind, that you can tell by the way they talk to you. Not that your evaluation is not going to comment on any collateral, by the way, but you already know that they have a negative point of view, which it usually is not very helpful to the child. I mean, if the father or the mother would not be in this debate or evaluation process if they didn't have some merit and wanted to parent the child. I mean, yes, it could be strictly I've never, there's always some interest in being with the child. So I even had a case recent where the father was living in China and wanted the child to move to China. But I mean, I couldn't see myself saying that. But by the end, he had changed his point of view. And by the way, because it takes a while, the evaluation. But he really did care about the child. I mean, could he parent? That's another situation. But so you really have to talk to anybody they want. All right, so yeah, concerns is a good word to say to people. So then anybody you think, like people they leave off, can I speak to the teacher? One of them will say no, or one of them say yes. I really think I need to talk to the teacher. If the child's having issues in school, that's what I would, certainly suggest. I wouldn't just go by what they say. You have to see but what what you think is very important with regard to the collage. So observation is very critical part to the evaluation. So I like going to the home. I would highly recommend going to where the child is going to go and sit down with your pad for an hour and observe them together, because people do it in their office and you get stuff there, but you don't get a chance to look at the home. And that's very important. And you charge for that too. I mean, I like that. So you write down behavioral observations, and clinical notes too. So to me, that's the thing that holds up the most under testimony is my eyewitness account of these two people in his or her home. It's made a difference in several cases I've testified for. So that's a critical part. I like doing it after the interviews because for a few reasons. One, I want as much information as possible before I go into an observation. So I get people's opinions of one another, like the mother's opinion of the child's opinion of the mother. And then I want to see, I don't want to, so it's rich with answers, the observation, like Ph.D. says, okay? The other thing that sometimes comes on, if you don't do this until the end of the interview, is that the person will want to engage you to tell you something, the adult. And now you really, you're not having an observation. I actually had one where the mother didn't want me to interview the child alone. Now that's a problem, okay? I said, well, we'll be in the other room. And we were going to try to talk soft. And the girl was 13, like she had stuff to say. No, but she's like 11. She had stuff to say. So she just kept following me around the room. We were trying to get private, and the mother was trying to follow us. And it was like, I could tell her to hang back, which I did eventually, but it was kind of interesting to see her do that. See, so now that's part of my evaluation, that she would not let us be alone. So, and then we went, the girl said, can we go to my room? And she said, okay. I said, let's leave the door open. And then she sent in the brother to keep interrupting. And my guess is she was asking him what he heard, because she was making a lot of allegations. So here we go. This is what I'm going to, same home visit. I had somebody, this child, the boy, like filled with paint, running around the house, like you really get to see. The other interesting thing is, that this is extremely notable, but it's like they eat the same dinner every single time I came there. And it was takeout, which, no offense, okay, I'll probably do that later, but every single time, especially like that's the part that is the part that also that intrigues me. They know I'm coming. They know I'm taking notes on everything. One mom put her kid in front of an iPad, which I next to down is to don't use anything like that. I want to see them interact. But this is interesting. So the child was eating in front of the iPad. and the other child was at the table, and it was just, I mean, not that it has to be Ozzy and Harriet, but you get a sense of how much they interact or how she parents, really. So if they do want to set something up, it's not like a movie, you know, like, oh, let's watch a movie. No, that doesn't count. So actually they have to go to old school games, and it's fascinating because maybe now after the pandemic, but before, like, people don't know how to play those games. Sometimes they have to take time to learn them or have never played together. I've seen the families never have played that together. It's good, wholesome fun, board games. All right. So copious notes, copious. Sometimes you can't keep up. Like, I take more than I'm going to put in the eval. Obviously, I'm not going to say they had the same takeout, because that says nothing about the child's best interest, you know. But it's interesting to me just because you can get a sense of, you know, what their level of comfort is with someone kind of strange in the house. It was kind of sad. The girl wanted to talk to me, and she had a hard time. Okay. So it's best to dictate evaluation as you go along. That's probably an obvious thing to say, but I'm just saying, I think it's the best way to do it because it's fresh, especially the observation. It's fresh. You don't want to forget anything. Again, these notes, not everything's going into your evaluation, but it's fresh. So you can write down impressions to guide you along the process, you know, because sometimes things go so fast. If kids are not like sitting together talking or whatever, playing a game, if they're just running around, it's hard to keep eye on everything that's going on. So you just want to keep writing and writing the best you can. It's interesting for the court to know who can manage their child and who has a better time managing their children. Okay, so and the recommendations are a really important part. So you put all of your collaterals on the top of the report, and I mean all of the documentation sources, and then you list all of your collaterals, and then you talk about the purpose of your evaluation before you even start. So how I structure the evaluations, and many others people do it this way, is you put, you know, that one person first and their psychological evaluation. Then you get to the observation. Again, the observations really are the, what do I think, given everybody told what they told me or what I've read? What do I think is really happening right now? And it's interesting as the other thing is, as the evaluation progresses, so do events in the family. So you have to also re-interview people about what's going on now. What in one case, the mom was complaining that the father wasn't feeding the kids on time, or there was something else going on. So there's more questions back and forth as you go along, but you want to get most of it done. So they come out to more than 40 pages. I don't think I've ever seen one shorter. That's why I put, they're much longer. They can be much longer too. And a big part of this is the recommendations. Okay, so there's conclusions and recommendations. So conclusions are kind of how each person is, in a way, right? How you view, because you just did each section. So how you view each person, how you pardon that, excuse me. Okay, so it's like you want to get into what your view is of every adult. Now you're going to give your impressions, really. So that's the conclusions. Then you give the of each person, and then you give a kind of family dynamic conclusion. What you observed, what you saw, what you think, what they say. You know, around mental health issues, there's a lot of things that parents disagree about. That's not just parenting that's connected, but they want the same therapist, and they want to agree on the same therapist, which I think makes a lot of sense, to be honest. I mean, you only want the kid going to one therapist, but they often disagree on what the child needs to be treated for. So they're not depressed, or they're not anxious, or their mother makes her anxious. She's not anxious with me. I mean, that kind of stuff. So you want a really good understanding of what the child's mental health, and obviously if they're in therapy, that's great. You can talk to the that's a collateral, and get any reports, but you're also interviewing the child. And you don't ever ask them, the child, direct questions like, what do you think? I say things like, one question, like, so how much time do you spend with each person? What do you think a good time amount of time? Does that work for you? And I'm not telling them who do you want to spend your time with. What's it like sleeping there, or sleeping here, or eating? What do you do at the different houses? So you get a real sense of what the kid wants. And so that's part of really what binds the family impressions, what the children think. Okay, so clear recommendations regarding therapy. Now you're going to do your own parenting time schedule based on what you've seen. What other people want too, what the parents, and what's realistic. You're going to get a sense of who can do it. Like, if they might say, like the man in China, obviously the mother was going to see the kid a lot. If they went to China, and he was working all the time. So there was another caretaker involved, a potential caretaker, which nobody knows. I mean, it's good to interview current caretakers. So some of the recommendations, you just, I mean, they're parenting time recommendations. You have to really see what's feasible and doable. And the child support system is pretty important when they're teenagers, especially. And the other thing is, in this case, with the father in China, there were two boys, and the boys were really close. And he was asking for one of them. Well, the other kid was over 18, but they were close and they lived together. He had a lot to say about that family. You interview every sibling, whether they're the point of it concern or not. Anybody who lives in that house needs an interview. And you don't make recommendations on a secondary caregiver or conclusions. Like, you wouldn't say, I mean, you would say something like the grandmother seems to support the mother's point of view, but you don't comment on what they said or more. You may give quotes from what other people say, because people sometimes say interesting things. Okay. So now, once you write the report, both attorneys get the report. That's who gets the report. And they may decide to do a deposition prior to anything, or just to clarify, or for whatever reason. And ask also about retainer fees for testimony. That's more. You're going to charge more for this, like I said, $5,200. And it's really basically endorsing what you wrote. And I finally believe that, and the more variables you have, and if you've taken the time to really do it thoroughly, not because they want another court date, but thoroughly, you'll be pretty confident, I think, maybe not always, but you'll be pretty sure about why you came to your recommendation. As a matter of fact, you're going to put it in the evaluation. So it's basically testifying to what you wrote. So now I have last thoughts, and I don't know if 10 minutes or so are good for questions. I'm watching the Q&A. So I'm guessing I'm like, this is my time to wrap up. So, but let me say a couple more things. So, very important. This is your role. You're a custody evaluator. That's it. You can't, be a therapist. You can't recommend a therapist. You can't, that's not your role. Like if you do a regular evaluation, yeah, that's fair. Perhaps it's fair. And people have different opinions about whether or not in a regular evaluation, not a custody family eval, you can't be anybody's therapist here, but maybe there. And that's the last time you're ever going to hear from these people. You might have some retainer money to return, but you go through lawyers to return it. So please review any ethics regarding conducting a parenting time evaluation. So when you go to court, they do a voir dire, which is, swear you in as an expert. They want a reading list of the books that you've read in your workshops, because this is a very important thing. And they don't want, somebody without really some sort of training to do this. And I've never seen that happen, but I think that's just worth saying. Maybe you already know that. It's ideal to really kind of have someone mentor you with regard to this. I learned a lot from him. So there's been new parenting books coming out all the time, parenting evaluations, everything you can read about that. The children, impact on children. That's an expert to immerse yourself, really. Go to trainings, workshops, and conferences. Many, that was so helpful for me. American Academy of Forensic. And definitely, I would go to a mediation class, certification class. That was, I believe it was 3 weekends of all day. So a 6-day certification. And it was so helpful. You can do mediation after that. I didn't, but you can. But you learn more about what's going on. Finances are a huge part for people to argue about too. So continue to receive supervision consultation. Keep yourself up on journal readings. So yeah, another thing I want to say is sometimes people don't agree with the recommendations and they get kind of angry with you, or sometimes they want to retaliate and make a board complaint. But if you followed, if you have informed consent, if you use confidentiality, if you were upfront with your services and your pricing and everything, and you let them know what was going on in the case, yeah, those are the things people try to get you with, something on that level. So get your releases. If you've done everything, okay, they may make the allegation anyway, and you might have to defend yourself, but you will have the documentation to defend yourself. So I feel a little more confident about maybe doing these kind of evaluations. Plus, I was trained systemically. I look at things very in a family systemic way. Each person has a relationship. They have an impact on one another. Totally, they're different dynamics when the whole family is together. It's interesting to look at things in that way. And I may even comment in my evaluations, the brother's a support system, the older brother's a support system. So that's good. All right, I think I'm gonna take questions now. How's that sound?
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Dr. DiGiorio-Miller, Janet, for a very helpful crash course, so to speak, from beginning all the way to the end of the entire process that I'm sure is, anything from seasoned veterans here of the process to those that are very unfamiliar with the important work that we can do in forensic psychology and parenting evaluations. We do have a lot of questions that have come in so far. I'll do the best I can to integrate.
And actually, you just reminded me of something I didn't say. The evaluation could stop at any point because they don't pay you. One good reason. Or they could stop because they dropped it, or something went on, and to do something else, or everything's changed. So that's why you take retainer in pieces. I forgot to say that. So go ahead. Thank
Gotcha.
you.
Gotcha. For those that have stayed on, just note the links for the surveys should be available in the chat box. Make sure you open that now, test it, make sure the link works for you. You can continue to enter questions. We'll do the best we can to get to several of those before we get to the top of the hour. Some people had questions about you had referenced this oftentimes rarely ever works ideally, where sometimes people cancel or sometimes people don't consent to be interviewed. So it rarely works under optimal conditions. And somebody said, what if one parent says no to you interviewing a collateral source like a teacher, but the other parent says yes to that same source? Are you allowed to still interview that person, and how do you proceed?
That's a good question. These are the nuances I was talking about. We're starting right there. That's a really good question. No, you're not allowed. Let's start there. Okay. But I have a conversation with the person who says no. And I say, I don't think I could really give you a comprehensive conclusion without this person. And usually they say yes, because they want me to finish. And a teacher's kind of important. Like if it's really, actually, I just say it about, I think whoever they want me to talk to, I don't want to say no to any source. So that's my answer to that. Yeah. I just say it's important to the evaluation process.
Thank you. How about similarly, how do you proceed when significant others, say one parent has a new dating partner, they're not identified in the court order, they live in the home, but they're refusing to participate in the evaluation in any way? How do you proceed in that case?
That's a good question too. I talk to the attorneys about it and then see what they know, and because I'm going to need him or her. I can't, that's a huge piece of it. So if they have documentation, which they usually would, because if somebody's going to move in with your child, you want people, you usually tell your attorney. So I would consult with the attorneys about that. Say, I have it, and actually a lot of times I say, I have a snag here, I really need to, and they help me sometimes get to the release, the okay with that, the permission, the consent. Yeah.
So kind of what you referenced before, of everything you can do to talk to the people that have been brought up.
And they're motivated for these aren't the things that get in the way. They run out of money. That's what kids. Right. Go ahead.
Sure. Regarding doing observations in the home, what approaches do you recommend to help reduce awkwardness of that situation, especially for older kids? What do you suggest they do while you're there observing?
I'm there with my clipboard, so I just say, I'm just taking notes. I need you to do what you do anyway. So if the kid wants to sit on the couch and sulk or be whatever, be awkward, that's pretty much, I don't, it's not a therapy session. It's an evaluation, and you need to kind of stay in that role. I just say, this is important. Your mom and dad want this to happen. They have some issues that they want some recommendations on, and this is part of it. And I'm going to do it with your other person too. But let me back up. I've already interviewed the kid. I've already talked to the child about this kind of stuff, and they don't like it, but they get a heads up. And then by the time I get there, that's true when I work with teens, they know what I'm going to do. It's not like I walk in the house and they don't know it. And I have to be, they already know me. So, yeah.
Great. That context that this isn't their first time meeting you at all.
Yeah. And I explained to them the whole process I tell anybody who wants to know, the whole process of the evaluation is really important.
Sure. A couple of people brought up any concerns about potential negative impacts of using an instrument like the MCMI in a parenting evaluation, given that it's normed on clinical populations less than broader community samples. And has been criticized to over pathologize.
Well, I like where you're going. That's why I don't use it. Sometimes, but you would have to have a very sophisticated, I mean, usually sometimes attorneys will go to testing and you know, but then they have to educate themselves and they have to figure that out. And you know, it could go there. I like Milan is tested on forensics. So yeah. I haven't been in that position when I've used it under consultation, but I'm sure it could happen. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Do you recommend audio recording your interviews for
No.
accuracy and transparency? No. Can you tell more?
Absolutely not. It's first of all, if they want to record you and it has happened, then obviously you're going to say no to that. Okay. But sometimes it's on the covert, you know, it's not like you frisk them, but you don't want it either way. You don't want it either way. So, I don't know why you would do this, to be honest. If you think it'll make it easier to dictate, it really won't. Now you're going through the interview twice and you're wasting your time. You need to dictate from your notes. And the reason I said no is because it you know, they may be able to say, I didn't consent to, I mean, you're not doing anything legal. You didn't get their consent. If you did get their consent, now they know it's recorded and now they can ask their attorneys for transcript. It gets real. You don't want to be in that position. It's bad enough you have to listen to and watch the recordings of each other. You don't want to engage in that. So I'm not sure why you would do it. It really does lengthen the process. You take good notes and then dictate. That's what you do. Yeah.
Some people asked for clarification when you talked about starting with the parent with the most allegations. They wanted to clarify if you meant the most allegations against them or the one that has offered the most allegations.
Oh, thank you. Okay. The one who has offered. So you want that person to be heard because they're kind of the squeakiest wheel, and you, although that's not a good analogy, but they're the ones that you really want to talk to because they need to get heard and they might have something legitimate to say. So it might be serious. Usually it is. So you want to start with that and understand exactly what their allegation is. Then you talk to the other person and then you hear their side of the story. Like, this person said this serious thing about you.
Gotcha.
Some
people have thrown out as an idea in terms of the audio taping. They say it can potentially protect the evaluator against false allegations later on if they're accused of anything during the evaluation. So that's.
I think what you have to protect yourself about is not being upfront on financial information with people, confidentiality. Your process of the evaluation is hard for someone to question in that way, unless they're saying you did something to the child, which I don't know. That doesn't.
Sure.
That hasn't happened then, you know, in cases I know. Yeah.
Gotcha. Well, and as we wrap up here, somebody mentioned that very early on, you referred to books or articles to educate yourself. Are there any particular resources or readings that you would encourage those to read to learn more about these kinds of evaluations?
You know what? Can I put together a reading list that I can send later?
Sure, and we could probably attach that to the slides that slide
let me
version that we
get
upload.
together a reading list. But I have to be honest, it's probably not gonna, well, it may follow. I'm in the process of moving, so I'll do it the best I can.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Janet, for all that information and very thorough perspective on what it is like to do these evaluations and how you can approach them. A really important, very meticulously needed to be done type of evaluation there. That wraps up this week's Law and Mental Health series. Stay tuned next week for Dr. Tiffany Monfort-Dent. We'll be discussing culturally informed assessments with culturally diverse youth. Until then, we hope you have a fantastic rest of the week and take care.
Bye.